Hello everyone, welcome to Q Skills Level 3 Listening and Speaking, and today we are doing Unit 1, the grammar topic for which is auxiliary verbs, okay? Auxiliary verbs. Now, first of all, what is an auxiliary verb? Maybe some of you know, maybe for some of you it's the first time. An auxiliary verb is a helping verb. Helping verb. So what does that mean? What does an auxiliary verb help? It helps the main verb of the sentence. So this is not the main verb of the sentence, it's a helping verb. And what do you call this one? Auxiliary verb. For example, we have the word do, we have the word be, and also have. These are the three main examples that we will look at today. Do, be, and have. All three of these are what? Auxiliary verbs. When are auxiliary verbs used? When do we use them? There are two main times that we use them, which we will talk about today. So we use auxiliary verbs in questions, and we use them in negative statements or negative sentences. For a question, for example, we say, does he like pizza? The auxiliary verb here is does. In a negative, we might say, he doesn't like pizza. Here, the auxiliary verb is doesn't. Okay? Now, both of these are in which tense? Okay, these are both in simple present tense. Okay, does he like pizza and he doesn't like pizza are both in simple present tense. Of course, is that the only tense that we have? Of course not. We have other tenses as well. So let's look at some other tenses where we also use auxiliary verbs in questions and negative statements. Another tense we have is simple past. Okay? In this tense, we use the auxiliary verb do. Just like previously in the simple present tense, we also used words that come from do. We use does and doesn't. Both of those come from do. Just like that, in simple past, we also use the auxiliary verb do. For example, in a question, we can say, did they bring their books? Over here, the auxiliary verb is did. In a negative, we can say, they didn't bring their books. Here, the auxiliary verb is didn't. The next tense we have is present continuous. And in this tense, we use the auxiliary verb be. To make a question in this tense, we can say, are you reading? Here, the auxiliary verb is are. And of course, it comes from be. To make a negative sentence, we can say, we aren't reading now. Here, the auxiliary verb is aren't. And of course, that also comes from be. The next tense we have is past continuous. And for this tense, we also use the auxiliary verb be. But this time, it's not, the verb be doesn't become am, is, or are. This time it becomes was or were. Okay, so to make a question in this tense, we can say, was Mr. Fahad teaching here last year? Here, the auxiliary verb is was, and it comes from be. To make a negative statement, we can say, he wasn't teaching here last year. Here, the auxiliary verb is wasn't, and that also comes from be. Next, we have the present perfect tense. In this tense, we use the auxiliary verb have. Okay, so to make a question, we can say, has Arwa left yet? And of course, the word has comes from the word have. To make a negative statement, we can say, she hasn't left yet. Here, the auxiliary verb is hasn't, and of course, that also comes from have. So to summarize, we use auxiliary verbs for negatives and questions, and we do that in 5 different tenses that we talked about today. First, we have the simple present, where we use the auxiliary verb do, and the form that we use it in is the word does. Okay? And then we have the simple past, where we use the auxiliary verb do in its form did. In the present continuous, we use the verb to be, and that could be am, is, or are. And in the past continuous, we also use be, but in that tense, it can either be was or were. And in the present perfect, we use the auxiliary verb have, which could be have or has. Okay, so now let's check if you can do this. In these sentences, first look at sentence number 1. Here, you need to create a question in the simple present tense. In sentence number 2, you need to create a negative sentence, also in the simple present tense. Please pause the video, and when you're ready, check your answers. So as you see here, for number 1, the auxiliary verb was does, and for number 2, the auxiliary verb was doesn't. Let's try another one. Again, this time in number 1, you need to create a question, this time using the present perfect tense. And in number 2, also in the present perfect tense, you need to create a negative statement. So use an auxiliary verb to fill in the blanks. Please pause the video and come back when you are ready. So as you can see here, the auxiliary verb for the first sentence is the word has, and the auxiliary verb in the second sentence is the word hasn't. To practice this a little bit, let's look at 2 exercises in your book. Here we have exercise A on page 18 of your book. Here you have a sentence in the affirmative, but you need to make it negative. For example, I often make snap judgments. To make this negative, we add the word don't, which is an auxiliary verb. We say, I don't often make snap judgments. So to do this exercise, you will have to use the word do, be, or have, or any words that come from those 3. Okay, so if you can please pause this video now, complete the exercise, and then check your answers. Okay, so now you can check your answers for the first 3 questions of exercise A. Please pause the video. And now you can check your answers for number 4 through 6. Again, please pause the video. Exercise B is similar, but this time you don't need to make negatives, you need to make questions. Again, you're using the auxiliary verbs do, be, or have. So the first one says, I have made many incorrect assumptions because of how someone looked. To make this a question, you can say, have you made many incorrect assumptions because of how someone looked? Now notice here, instead of using I in the answer, they used you. When they made a question, they changed it to you, because you're asking a question. So you don't ask a question to yourself, and the question is about yourself, so they changed it to you. So if you can pause the video now, complete this exercise, and then check your answers. Now that you've done exercise B, please check your answers. You can pause the video and continue when you're ready. those were the exercises in the book. And now for more practice, of course, you have your online LMS account. Thank you.